once you enter the system, and I was traveling and speaking to people, and I was traveled throughout this region and including Kaziranga. I could see that there was a distance between the reality of people, how they were living, and even the social reality of why poaching kind of takes place, versus how it is framed in these upper echelons of power in conservation.
What was your specific kind of methodology there? And then also more of a focus on the specific Indigenous communities that are surrounding the park. How much engagement did you have with them specifically?
Are you trying to explore like what are the tourists' expectations? Are they just like causing problems, troubles, or can they be part of the solution?
And several of the ideas that you present as key components and critiques of ecotourism often tend to be associated with sustainable tourism instead.
I have also some questions about the indigenous communities, the local communities working there. How is their more specific, how is the relation with the tourism system? Who is able to become a tour operator, guide, or how they engage with the tourism machinery there? And also if they can combine tourism and with some local agriculture, is there kind of seasonal activities they rotate among these activities?
Ecotourism is not necessarily taken up to be the same as tourism in and around nature protected areas like national parks. It can be.
One of the important elements of ecotourism being that the transfer of ownership of power is actually with communities and they are the stewards of it, and not just end up becoming like daily wage workers in these fancy hotels or resorts that come up. Women kind of respond differently to technology being used in conservation, for example, camera traps or drones.
Even though there was not a lot working for Assam as a region because it was troubled with insurgency. But the fact that they were still able to save these rhinos in Kaziranga actually became, through like this heavy hand, became one of the templates that kind of designed India's really big flagship program called the Project Tiger.
It's a wonderful initiative.
The Global South Network opened new horizons for judicial cooperations.
Global South Network provide a platform for meaningful dialogue and cooperation, fostering efforts to build a more equitable and resilient legal landscape.
GSN Network continues to expand areas of activity, further strengthening its impact and reach.
The universal concept of justice compels us to join our efforts, and this is the forum for promoting the same goal.
Well deserved for the hectic activity you have made. I am astonished, I am amazed, I was impressed.
May I at the outset commend you, Dr. Ayad, for the immense work that you're doing in the GSN. And the Global South Network is a much admired initiative.
It's commendable. South Network focuses on all disciplines and regions, creating a bridge between academia, full society, legal community, etc.
We are being criticized for doing our job and for upholding the federal constitution. Like I have said in the past, I will not bend to such lame pressures and insinuations.
Dr. Norman Riat, the founder and convener of the Global South Network's visionary leadership has established a vibrant forum where judges, academics, and practitioners from around the world can share and exchange ideas.
I would like to point out that Dr. Riat's initiatives have not only enriched comparative judicial dialogue, have also fostered mutual understanding of the diverse challenges that courts face in safeguarding the rule of law and constitutionalism.
After all, what would you do as a colonizer from the global north, conditioned by a systemic othering mindset and driven by economic lust built on commodification, including the commodification of human beings?
This last question is not so easy, a bit complicated.
The Global South Network provides an important space to share experiences and learn good practices from one another.
Dialogue takes on a particular importance thanks to Global South Network, which allow us to believe in a better world of the rule of law.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to the 28th online seminar of Phase 5 of the Global South Network's International Interdisciplinary PhDinprogress weekly seminar series. Our speaker today is Gargi Sharma, a PhD candidate in the School of Sociological Studies, Politics and International Relations at the University of Sheffield. Gargi will present part of her doctoral research in a paper entitled Ecotourism in Kaziranga, a Utopian Panacea. I'm Dr. Norman Riat, lecturer in law at the Leicester Law School, founder and chief convener of the Global South Network, and I've been running these sessions since March 2023. We are fortunate to have an excellent and highly interdisciplinary panel of discussants and peer commentator. Our first discussant is Dr. Tiffanie Hardbarger, a citizen of the Cherokee Nation and associate professor of sociology in the Department of Cherokee and Indigenous Studies at Northeastern State University in the United States of America. Our second discussant is Dr. Elif Vozar, faculty lecturer at the Hamilton School for Classical and Civic Education at the University of Florida in the United States of America. Our third discussant is Dr. Juan Dabezies, a researcher with the Threat Reduction for the Environment, People and Animals project in the Department of Geographical Sciences at the University of Maryland and professor at the University of the Republic of Uruguay. Our fourth discussant is Dr. Chris Hurst, assistant professor in tourism and hospitality at Newcastle Business School, Northumbria University. We are also delighted to welcome Dwani Sunil Lalai, a PhD candidate in the Department of Urban and Rural Development at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences in Uppsala, who will serve as our peer commentator. Thank you to all our discussants and our peer commentator for generously contributing their time and expertise. Their diverse perspectives should enable a rich discussion of the theoretical, methodological, environmental, political, and social dimensions of Gargi's research. In terms of format, Gargi will present her research. We will then hear from each of our discussants, followed by our peer commentator. Gargi will have an opportunity to respond before we open the discussion to questions and comments from the wider audience, if the time permits. I kindly ask everyone to remain muted while others are speaking. The questions may be placed in the chat during the presentation or raised during the question and answer session. Gargi, thank you for sharing your research with us. We very much look forward to the presentation and the discussion that follows. The floor is now yours.
So thank you so much, everybody, for making the time to come and attend this. I hope it's not a half-baked talk because my work is still in process. But yeah, so my name is Gargi and I am a doctoral candidate at the School of Sociological Studies at the University of Sheffield. Sheffield's a University of Sheffield. So today I will be sort of talking about my ongoing research in Kaziranga National Park, which I have just concluded, and where I sort of broadly question this normative framing about ecotourism as being this win-win solution that can balance out economic development, conservation imperatives, and uplift communities. So I sort of in this place in Kaziranga National Park, I sort of question this framing. So going back to Kaziranga National Park as to like why is it so unique, or why did I pick this site? And the history of Kaziranga National Park is very interesting, and obviously it is a haven for the greater one-horned rhino. And by that I mean it is the last stronghold of the entire population of this particular species. And this national park in it, India is the last stronghold, and this within that this national park holds 60% of the world's population of the greater one-horned rhino. And the history of the conservation history of this greater one-horned rhino is something that's also very interesting, because in this landscape, the species was almost hunted out. There were only a few hundred remaining. But now, if you look at the numbers, there are more than 2,500 rhinos within the landscape of Kaziranga National Park. And I don't know if you're aware, but the one of the biggest threats to the survival of the rhinos has been illegal wildlife trade, because the rhino horn really fetches a lot of money in the illegal wildlife trade in the black markets. And so there was constant and there's a constantly a demand for it in the traditional Asian medicine market. So the threat of poaching was really high. And obviously the government has, along with NGOs, been able to, like I said, achieve something very remarkable, that they've been able to stabilize the population of the rhinos to the point where now people have started talking about overcrowding of rhinos in this landscape and translocating them to the satellite wildlife sanctuaries. And this has happened because the government has really used a heavy hand to cut down on to curb poaching and to patrol this landscape, which has which for which they have adopted a lot of militarized conservation strategies like shoot at sight orders, um, laying down of military like informant networks. And so at the end of the day, it has really paid out. In some ways it has worked in the favor of conservation. And like I said, we've now been able to see since 2016, been able to see a few years where we had zero rhino poaching in this national park, where at one point of time every day there were 3 rhinos at least getting killed. And so this kind of protection of the rhino and this haven that Kaziranga is, it is also beyond the rhino. This landscape is pretty unique. It's a riverine landscape, and it has a lot of species also which occupy this space, and there are a lot of endemic species as well. But one of the biggest pull now that the government is framing about this national park is it calls it India's own Masai Mara. And by that, what they mean is that the selling point of the Masai Mara is that you see the big five. And this is a similar way they're trying to market Kaziranga, because now they have the rhino, which is one of the best protected big fives. You've got the tiger, you've got the elephant, you've got the bear, you've got the water buffaloes. So India, it is projected as India's own big five as well. And so this sort of all these things that are going on for Kaziranga has meant that Kaziranga has also become a really important in an economic opportunity for the state of Assam. And here, you see an intersection again with the history of Assam. But before that, like what we see happening in Assam is that tourism was not, if you go back into the policy documents and the investment strategy of Assam, you will see that tourism is not really mentioned. Although tourism has existed in this landscape since the late 90s, but it was quite small scale. It is only 2008 onwards that we start seeing that the government is really focused on bringing tourists to Kaziranga National Park, which they frame it as that we have this natural beauty, we should capitalize on it. So the way Assam is a largely a rural economy. It used to be a rural economy, and people do live in rural spaces, and much like Kaziranga. So tourism was kind of seen as this that industry that's going to uplift these people, while capitalizing on this natural beauty that there is. And what I argue is that bringing Kaziranga into forefront was also an important strategy for the state of Assam to sort of reconcile with its troubled past. And by troubled past, what I mean is that um, you know Assam is on the northeastern periphery of India, and after independence there's been, and this is a colonial legacy of how Assam was treated in the British Empire. But how it translated into post-colonial politics was that in Assam there was a sustained movement against you know a sustained movement against the mainland India, and they felt Assam as a state kind of felt that they were being neglected quite a lot. And so during this time, we saw a lot of political insurgency, taking place, and because of which going to Assam and the way Assam was portrayed as this troubled place where economic development cannot happen, where people cannot go. But 2008 onwards, because some peace agreements were signed, then the government was really strapped for money because it was lagging behind on this economic development, and tourism became this one really important opportunity. And the way tourism, and with tourism, you kind of start investing in like the parallel infrastructure that you need, and which has kind of made Kaziranga a very interesting diplomatic site because it's so close to the main city and main airport. So the government is sort of like kind of able to arrange these very well curated optics about showing that okay, we have moved on, look at our infrastructure, and they're able to curate experiences that kind of show that like how Assam over the years has sort of evolved. So Kaziranga is not just an important conservation site it's also become this very important investment opportunity as well as a diplomatic site because of tourism. And so it kind of also neatly coincides with what conservationists for the longest time have been saying, especially conservation, like since we've seen a spurt in neoliberal conservation strategies where they say nature should be sold in order for it to be saved. And ecotourism is seen as that is one market-based intervention that's going to bring economic development, which in the case of Assam was very much needed, and also sustain this sentiment for the protection of the rhino, and also be that harbinger of social development for the people, so that they see the benefit of conservation. Um, and so it was portrayed as a win-win solution. If we kind of peel this layer and why there was a need for this win-win solution, I mean, the Kaziranga, much like most of the not the national parks but protected areas in the world, has this legacy of being very anti-people, in the sense that let's say in Kaziranga, it's an agrarian frontier more than a conservation frontier, where people sort of there were home communities, the mission communities would go into the forest, and they relied on the forest. They had their own cosmology living with the forest. But once, these I and with the it started with the colonial Raj, where conservation spaces were started to be seen incompatible with certain kinds of people, which invariably meant the brown people or the natives. So these small fenced out chunks of lands were seen as a way to go forward to save a species, and which happened in Kaziranga as well. These involatile spaces were created for the rhino, and which meant that the natives sort of lost all their rights about grazing and stuff. And over the years, that's what's been happening. And in 1974, Kaziranga was declared as a national park. And being declared as a national park means that for all rights were sort of gone, all these ancestral rights were gone. And then in 2007, it was declared as a tiger reserve, which was again a very economic decision made by the forest department. But it came again with the cost was borne by the people who have sort of now a negative sentiment towards the national park and the park authorities, because the trade-off that they've sort of had with conservation is having to lose their rights and having to lose their rights, their cosmologies. So ecotourism is sort of in that framing seen as this this strategy that is going to balance it all out and like kind of cut down on this negative sentiment. So in some ways, if you go into Kaziranga, I mean, you will see that okay, tourism has had a positive impact. In a very modern way, you can say that it has had a positive impact. It has led to some development. But like I've spoken to so many people during my research, but even as a lay person who was traveling through Kaziranga so many times and very disconnected from the landscape initially, the question that kind of comes to your lips is that have we reached a limit of ecotourism in Kaziranga? And it is, I think, in some ways we are sort of reaching a limit because there's been an exponential growth in the number of tourists that are coming into this landscape, and the government still kind of continues to push for more and more tourists to come in. And it is not just the state government, but even the central government is very focused on you know tourism. And because tourism is an incredible industry in that way, it boosts consumption, it brings in money from one place to another. So people are flying in with their capital and spending money, and so it's giving a boost to the economy. But with the amount of like the people that are coming in, it also means that everybody is coming into the landscape and they want to experience the landscape, and so you have to create this supporting infrastructure to have that happen and then have them also visit again. So with these ambitious numbers, um you know one of the central experiences into ecotourism, in the conservation space or in a national park is the safari. And so you have to be able to arrange for safaris. And in Kaziranga, what we are seeing is that currently there are more than 500 jeeps that fly in and out of Kaziranga during the tourism season, which is increasingly becoming bigger and bigger, by longer and longer. And by that, what I mean is that um, initially the tourism season was very well regulated, so it had a strict start line and a strict deadline. And so start line as in this time the park would open, this time the park would close. But over the years, what we're seeing is becoming more and more flexible, and the it's becoming longer. So as opposed to 4 months, it became 6 months, and now it's become almost 8 months. But then I sort of like, there's a concept called carrying capacity, and carrying capacity means how many jeeps can go inside the park without, negatively impacting it. These numbers have been very difficult to come by because the government is really like, there's so much focus on capital. So some of these numbers are, hidden or or hidden in like multiple layers to kind of find out, or just like not really written down anywhere. But anyway, I was able to speak to some, ex-servicemen, and so they had done an assessment of the carrying capacity, and it's 256. But if you see in Kaziranga, there are more than 500 jeeps at one point of time. Similarly, accommodation is a big thing, because if you're going to get so many people every year, you need to accommodate them somewhere. And there is again no sort of an assessment on how many hotels can be created, can be constructed in this landscape, because more and more are coming up. The government is trying to bring investment from five-star hotels like Hyatt and every other such big companies to make hotels in this landscape. So currently there are 175 hotels. Hotels also includes homestays, but there is this huge infrastructure that is now present in this landscape, which kind of sort of makes you question, like, okay, have we reached a limit? Have we reached this real estate bubble, or this tip of the iceberg, and like now we just like need to stop? So these are some of the questions, or some of the answers that are like very visible once you enter this landscape. But what is very clear is that, you know, everybody sort of agrees that there is a need for regulation of how tourism is going, because it is but at the same time, if you read some of the investment policies, or even some of the framings around Kaziranga by the state, there is a very heavy focus on capital development and capital investment, and it is really coming sort of at the cost of this national park's integrity. So naturally, this is the huge quantum of tourists that you want, and this is the main economy that you have in that landscape, and it's been operating for around 30 years. So it has really shaped the landscape profoundly. And so, like I said, Kaziranga was not just a conservation frontier, but more primarily and for mostly, it was an agricultural space. It was an agrarian space because it's on the banks of one of the most fertile rivers in India, and this river is the lifeline for millions of people. And which was the same in Kaziranga. People, sort of relied on agriculture. But now, how the tourism economy is sort of shaping agriculture is that right now there is sort of a land rush going on. And by that, I mean, because the government is so hyper focused on, marketing the potential of tourism in Kaziranga, there are people from outside of Kaziranga or all over the India who sort of are coming in and wanting to buy land, to have that one parcel of land in Kaziranga, and say that, okay, I have this parcel of land. And over there, obviously, they are also building these hotels or jungle camps or homestays. And the idea is to kind of, okay, if it is, the idea is that, like, it is assumed that being in Kaziranga, having a business in Kaziranga is going to be extremely profitable during the tourism season. So there is a sort of a land rush. Land prices have drastically increased because there are people who are willing to pay that much money. And there are no regulations in terms of like who can buy land, how much land can be bought. And at the same time, what is happening is, agriculture has over the years sort of become unproductive. And that has happened because, the people, the villages are very close to the national park. There is no buffer zone. It's completely core zone. And over there is high human wildlife conflict. And even though, there is a history of coexistence within this landscape, but as the space for animals to move is becoming reduced due to these many big establishments coming in, the conflict has sort of gone up. And more than that, I think conflict has always been there. Like, people would, mostly, like, they cultivate paddy. They would always leave certain percentage of it because they felt like, because they believe that, we have to leave, the elephant is going to come and eat it. But even the compensation that they get is not sufficient. It doesn't meet the market prices. It comes very late. So, and it's a flood prone area. So again, there is this hardship involved almost every year, that you may sow your paddy, and then there would be a terrible flood, and then you have to start again. So, and also the incomes coming from paddy are very limited, so they don't really support you throughout the year. And, like, I don't want to say that, like, in this landscape, people are poor. Okay, they're not living below poverty line, majority of them, but they live in a very hand to mouth sort of a situation. And India doesn't really have universal healthcare and stuff like that. And so people and the cost of living has really gone up. So people are also like selling land, or there's incentive to sell land because agriculture has become unproductive, or there is a situation like, you want to pay for your health or education or something, or construct your home. So you are kind of forced to sort of sell your land for that quick monetary relief. Earlier people used to sell their cattle, but now cattle is not as expensive, or is not the thing that's going to bring economic relief when needed. It's now land has kind of taken that place. And also what is happening is that obviously like 30 years in making, and the way the government has sort of pushed for tourism employment, people are finding more people are finding employment in tourism in Kaziranga. And there are like, but the kind of jobs that people are getting are sort of are unskilled labor jobs. So they would be driving jeeps, which doesn't really require much skills because you're not guiding. Nature guiding is still a very tangential occupation. There are only 50 such guides in Kaziranga. And the income is seasonal, in the sense, like I said, the tourism season kind of can last anywhere between like 6 months to 8 months at this point, but that is the only period that you get where you have to earn your entire year's living. But over there also, within the elites of the community, there is sort of like grabbing of profit, um, you know and these jobs are also very precarious because the population around these in these villages has gone up. But there are always going to be people who would be willing to do jobs. So these jobs can be highly precarious, because if you quit, there will be some other person who will do it at a lower price, and that is something the hotels do make use of. The other thing that to employment in tourism has done, and which is that it has created this entire population of people who may have agricultural land but don't know how to do agriculture. So there might be these informal mechanisms through which they might do agriculture, but at the end of the day, it has made agriculture even more unproductive, because people really just feel like, why take this headache of dealing with so many issues that comes with cultivation? We can just probably sell our land. So that is also happening. That's how tourism is sort of shaped the land economy as well. So this is one example of that like unfolded in front of my own eyes when I was there. So this is used to be an agricultural land, but in the last 6 7 months that I was living in Kaziranga, there's been like an entire boundary wall that has come up, and the way construction is taking place in this area, it's just going to be a full-fledged hotel, even though they started by calling it a nursery, but the kind of construction that's taking place is actually construction for a hotel. So that is how it's going on. So like I said, tourism has become the main economy, and it has shaped the landscape for the better and the worse as well. So definitely there's been some benefit, like the rural economy. um you know like I said, if you want to bring that many tourists to a landscape, you kind of have to have supporting infrastructure. So there has definitely been linear development. There are better roads, there's better connectivity, there's penetration of the internet. So these things have really helped the people. But at the same time, speaking to people and just being able to observe, social development really has not really matched the speed or the linear development that's taken place. And by that I mean is that education, health, and meaningful employment, where there is like progress in your job, really hasn't happened. Like this image that is there on my right hand side is of a college, in Kaziranga. And in this college was started actually by the people themselves in 2019 or 2018, if I'm not wrong. And because they were fed up of the government not having you know uh, not constructing a college in a place that was so important to them. But yeah, there was nothing going on. So now the government has taken over this college, and now they're building more wings to it, but it had to be started by the people. So this is, and health again is a big challenge over there because there are no good hospitals. But I mean, good hospital is anyway a stretch to think about, but functional hospitals, um, where you can head for an emergency are far away in towns. That's which is at least 40 minutes away. Or, if it's something even more serious, then it's 2 hours away, the next better hospital. And like I said, there's been no meaningful employment because there's been no investment in education or skill development as such. So that sort of a way, social development has really taken a back seat. And now, like I said, you go to Kaziranga, you sort of feel, and you talk to people, you kind of, even authorities, they feel like we've reached over tourism. And now people are starting to see some of the environmental impacts of this over tourism, which doesn't really seems to stop. So one has really been water. Water is a theme that's come up a lot in my conversations with people, because there are no regulations about the construction of hotels. Some of these like smaller streams have kind of been, taken over by these hotel establishments, and they've blocked access to water for people. Then there is, groundwater table is going down because these establishments need so much water to run. There is also leaching of some chemicals that takes place, and some of these hotels are literally right in the middle of an agricultural field because, like I said, it's agricultural land that is sold and converted into commercial land for these places. So there is some leaching of these chemicals taking place, which is also making agriculturally worse. And the sheer amount of waste that is generated, I think that has now started to choke some of these water bodies. And literally for all these years, I don't know, the authorities did not really think about a proper waste management plan because I don't think they thought it's a rural economy, a rural place. There's no like a proper municipality or any of that. So these are things that are now, the government is starting to focus, but the tour operators and everybody is also sort of pushing to kind of bring into the forefront this environmental impact. And of course, here in Kaziranga, the product that is being sold is Kaziranga National Park and this fantasy of this untouched nature. So living in that constant shadow of militarization, where you can be pulled out if there is a poaching incident that has taken place, or if there is a need for expansion of the park, which is also happening. You're constantly living on this edge. So in many ways, tourism has been good and bad for the people, and that's what how they see it. Yeah, so and so the idea of tourism was, it's supposed to be trickle down economics that's going to bring in benefits, or I mean, if you look at it, or is it just like good old racial capitalism? And for that, we sort of need to like look at who really gains from tourism that is happening and the way it is happening, and who loses. And so in terms of who gains, I mean, it's literally the non-localites who have that capital, or private corporations that the government wants people to come, and then we've got the well-connected localites, and we've got the state and the politicians who are actually winning. But who loses is actually marginalized localites and wildlife. And I club them together because for them, they see themselves in this cosmology together. And so let's talk, if thinking a little bit more about the losers. It's the indigenous people and the local communities. And this loser is sort of coded into conservation in many ways because, like I said, fortress conservation meant like people and humans are incompatible, but the humans that were incompatible were supposed to be these tribal people who were actually saved these forests for so many years, but they were coded as primitive and uncouth and unmodern people whose activities were destroying the wildlife, but not the activity of a modern person. So there's some that sort of a thinking has sort of like gone on for till now in conservation. It's obviously now starting to change, but it's still the dominant theme, and which is something we see in ecotourism as well, and neoliberal conservation strategies. It is literally it disproportionately impacts indigenous people because you've taken their lands and you're trying to make them into better conservationists in a very modern sense. So it is them who have to be tinkered and, made into better citizens. In India, some of this thinking is actually coded within some of the legislations that we deal with. And, displacement of indigenous people for conservation has been a thing in the wildlife laws. But at the same time, indigenous people and local communities in India post independence have had to make a lot of sacrifices because the state has been the biggest grabber of the resources, and they have felt that, for nation's development, we need land, we need resources, and those resources are going to come from the indigenous people and local communities who own these vast patches of land and are custodians of it. So that sort of, precedence is already set within these policies. And so why I call it racial capitalism is that, what the key argument of racial capitalism framing is that you need capitalism needs this hierarchy to kind of, make profit, and to, to resource access for value production. And like I said, indigenous people and local communities in conservation itself have been, been racialized as this primitive people. And and that's exactly what's and and that, racialization kind of enables how, economy would, gain profit in conservation economies. And so what we see in Kaziranga and how it plays out is that, like, because this sort of framing is already there about indigenous people, they're able to expand the park, they're able to kind of evict people, Adivasis out, homes out, and mishings out, and not really pay market prices because it's again indigenous people. So it's sort of a it's all sort of a, like I said, a norm within the policy. It is also because it is indigenous people, the government has been able to sort of flout these environmental and social safeguards, that are already there in the law. But because they are able to kind of, they want to maximize profit, they know that if it was indigenous people and communities, we can, flout these mandated environmental laws because there is such a precedent already there in the history of India. Again, like I said, they've been able to neglect social development. Like one of the interviews put it very well. Social development has been neglected because we are the people from the jungle, and people who kind of are from jungle, they don't really need development, right? That is why for so many years we've had to live on the periphery, and there is some truth to it as well, because at the end of the day, it is in the interest of, racial capitalism to kind of keep these populations unskilled, keep them precarious, so that you can maximize a lot of profit by paying lower wages. And again, like I said, it's because you're flouting these environmental laws and everything, you're able to sort of marginalize agriculture, which actually was the source of sovereignty for a lot of people, and the only, and you're able to kind of put them in these really weird these poverty traps, because you're now hooking them onto this economy, which is so, like, right now dependent on, politics of how right-wing politics in the nation, these very hyper capitalist politics in the nation, which can change anytime with the regime comes in. So you have sort of like put these people in like these poverty traps, because again, you see their positions as very superfluous within the how economy is laid out. The question again, I come back to what I started with: is tourism a utopian fantasy of conservation? Perhaps it is. I think if there are no limitations, that definitely is going to happen. So yeah, so that's it. And if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gargi, for that thoughtful and engaging presentation. You have raised important questions about ecotourism, conservation, and local communities, and the tensions between idealized policy narratives and lived realities in Kaziranga. I am now pleased to invite our first discussant, Dr. Tiffanie Hardbarger, to offer her comments. Tiffanie?
Sure, thank you so much. Well, your presentation was incredibly informative, and I am coming from the perspective of being a Cherokee Nation scholar in Oklahoma, and looking at it from more of the indigenous tourism perspective. And so I would like to just kind of ask a couple of questions, if I could, to get started. First of all, in looking at, and I recognize that there are very different legal frameworks that work, with sovereignty in the United States and tribal governments and the situation on the ground in India. But if you could maybe talk a little bit more about your positionality to this topic, as far as how you came to this topic and maybe why it is important to you, as far as where you see yourself in that research, and how you went about doing your interviews. Were you just kind of doing like field work and just chatting with people and learning in that way, or what was your specific kind of methodology there? And then also more of a focus on the specific Indigenous communities that are surrounding the park. How much engagement did you have with them specifically? Those are just some questions kind of just to get the conversation started.
All right, so let's go to our second discussant, Dr. Elif.
Hello. First of all, thank you for this great presentation, Gargi, and I really enjoyed, and I like your photos from your field work too, to see them in your presentation. Especially like this is when I said it was interesting, like, because you just showed that ecotourism doesn't always mean like a win-win situation, and you just like trying to do your research to show that was really interesting. And so I was wondering actually, so it seems like you just like you try to explore the negative impacts on the indigenous and local communities. I was wondering, are you also trying to explore the tourist side? Are you trying to explore like what are the tourists' expectations? Are they just like in your research? Are they like causing troubles, or can they be part of the solution? Like when we revisit the ecotourism, when we try to make it more equitable, more inclusive, can tourists be part of this solution, or like they are like they are behind all those like issues? So I was wondering that, and I was also wondering like based on your research field work, what could be some of the solution to make this so-called ecotourism work better, make more beneficial for the local and indigenous communities, not only putting the cost on their shoulders. So thank you so much. I really enjoyed.
Great. Thank you, Elif, for your useful comments. I hope, Gargi, you are taking notes of the comments and questions. Let's go to Juan. Juan, over to you, please.
Okay. Thanks for the invitation. And I think the presentation was amazing. Thanks for this. I also think you are building here with this network a great space. So congrats for that. And Gargi, I think I really enjoyed the green humor cartoons that you used in the presentation. And my first comment is linked to one of them, one that says our tigers work part-time as traffic police. So I was wondering if you are thinking in including something about animal labor. There's some literature very interesting about the role of animals in tourism and in ecotourism that could be very useful for this work. And also you can connect these ideas with your proposal or idea of just tourism in the framework of multi-species justice. So this is something that I think will be great. I have also some questions about the indigenous communities, the local communities working there. How is their more specific, how is the relation with the tourism system? Who is able to become a tour operator, guide, or how they engage with the tourism machinery there? And also if they can combine tourism and with some local agriculture, is there a kind of seasonal activities they rotate among these activities? Also, last question is about the racialization, the marginalization of local people. Also, if there's a kind of process of incorporate the essentialization of these people as cultural value. You talked about value production, so I was wondering if maybe you can analyze the process of incorporating the local culture as in the process of value production in this tourist system. So these are my comments.
Thank you very much, Juan, for very thoughtful comments and important questions. Very much similar to what Tiffanie. Let's go to Chris.
What I wanted to say in regards to this, first off, Gargi, I want to start by thanking you for the opportunity to read your abstract and see your presentation here today. It's clear from your writing, from your words, that you're incredibly passionate. And I'd really like to commend you on that passion. And as I read between the lines and what was written and what you presented, there's a wide range of concepts, theories, and scholarship that are informing your work, ranging from social justice, neoliberalism, militarization, to power, politics, and activism, critical theories, post-colonialism, decolonization and unsettling scholarships, land use and conservation governance, species at risk, ecotourism, tourism broadly and in relationship to protected areas, even sustainable tourism, over-tourism, and ideas related to the generative possibilities of community-led tourism and tourism degrowth. And the nice thing is that all of these concepts and theories have really rich literatures to support your dissertation, should you wish to, frame your study in these spaces. If I may, I'd like to take the rest of the time here as discussant to provide some comments and questions for you to linger with. They aren't ones that you have to answer at the end of this. I think that, and I'm happy to share this as well. I think these are things that will take a little bit of time to think through, but I'd encourage you to consider some of the following. I understand that you're using ecotourism as the starting place within your dissertation. However, within tourism scholarship, ecotourism is not necessarily taken up to be the same as tourism in and around nature protected areas like national parks. It can be. And several of the ideas that you present as key components and critiques of ecotourism often tend to be associated with sustainable tourism instead. It's more of an emphasis on the market-based enhancements and growth than ecotourism is often attributed. But just because it's a nature space doesn't automatically make it ecotourism, and I think it might be worthwhile to spend a little bit of time as to why that framing matters. Similar to, I think, some of our other lovely colleagues and discussants who have talked here, I'd love to have more understanding of your positionality or relationship to the context that you're describing. Positionality is so important. It provides insights into why you're so passionate, why it matters, the so what of the research. You've mentioned you've traveled in and around the park. Are you from this region? Was it just a site where you lived for a period? What is your relationship with place, with the lands, with the indigenous peoples, and with the local communities in and around the park? What is that connection? What is that meaning? Well, what drives these passions? Is there a particular epistemological and theoretical framing informing your work that could perhaps provide some further scope and structure? All of the contextual factors that you've presented are really important. and they cover a wide range of issues that could all serve as the basis of your dissertation. So I think it might be helpful to scope it in a little bit more so that your passion shines for a story in a way that not only discusses the peoples, but also how you are a part of this story as well. And finally, in your abstract, you have talked about this being a qualitative study. Qualitative only really kind of describes how certain methods are taken up. It's not necessarily a methodology in and of itself. So it'd be really helpful to have more understanding of how and what exactly you've done, how you're studying it, with so many passions and politics expressed, both in the abstract and in your presentation. It might just add a little bit more that isn't quite as self-evident as I think you are thinking right now. And then finally, something to think with, especially given the focus on the peoples, the locations, the lands. Is the Kaziranga National Park the case for your analysis? Or is it just the context for discussions of these intersections between social justice, settler colonialism, now continuing post-colonialism, and tourism?
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Chris, for a global perspective. Let's go to Dhwani, who is also familiar with the geographic context. Dhwani, are you there?
Hello. Yes, I am.
Yes, over to you, please.
Yeah, thanks. Let me begin by thanking you for inviting me to this session. And Gargi, thank you for the wonderful presentation. I really enjoyed listening to your work and was relatable since I'm also from India and have worked here since the past 10 years in different contexts and forests of India. I was also actually reflecting a little bit on what Chris just said in terms of how ecotourism is framed, and some of my past work on ecotourism a long time ago, I was kind of recollecting that and thinking about how we wrote about ecotourism becoming like this catchphrase of any kind of tourism that's done in any kind of natural area. And what we centered then was actually ecotourism as one of the important elements of ecotourism being that the transfer of ownership of power is actually with communities and they are the stewards of it, and not just end up becoming like daily wage workers in these fancy hotels or resorts that come up, which was really reflecting in your presentation as well, is actually that is what is happening on the ground under the name of ecotourism. So that was really interesting to listen to. I just had one question that I wanted to ask you, is that we hear a lot of, we know that in India, a lot of the national parks, tiger reserve follow these fortress models of conservation that you just mentioned. And you also spoke a lot about militarization in this area. I was wondering within the indigenous people or the tribal communities there, if you came across any kind of maybe gender disaggregated or any kind of other layers of differences that or axis of differences that show how different people even within these communities encounter these or have different kinds of lived experiences. There's been research that shows how women kind of respond differently to technology being used in conservation, for example, camera traps or drones as an example. So I was wondering if your data speaks to that as well. But thank you, and eager to listen more.
Thank you very much, Dhwani, for comments. Gargi, now I think we have different perspectives from different parts of the world and different thematic perspectives. Before handing over the floor to you, I would like to slightly abuse my chair position and add a small question to what Tiffanie said and Chris said. And that is, how do you exactly see the indigenous communities in Kaziranga context, and based on their experiences, can we offer lessons to indigenous communities outside India and different other countries? Over to you, please.
Thank you so much, everybody, for attending this talk and like some of these really interesting, questions that you have asked and some of the points that you have given me to sort of ponder on. I think there is overall like a need for me to kind of talk about my positionality and um so Kaziranga is not a landscape that I sort of stumbled onto, and I am not from Assam. I am not from Kaziranga, but I used to work for various conservation organizations, and I used to work on a wildlife trafficking project, and that's how I sort of kind of got involved in understanding, what policies are there about controlling, trying to curb illegal wildlife trade. But also that also gave me the opportunity to kind of, be in touch with the donors and in touch with other NGOs about how they frame illegal wildlife trade. And rhino horn is that one, it's a one really important wildlife article that has sort of generated a lot of passionate responses, passionate to the sense that they're very radical in an extremist way, in militarized way. And so while I was working, obviously, like we were not, my organization was not involved in, militarized conservation strategies or any of that, or supporting any of that. But once you enter the system, and I was traveling and speaking to people, and I was traveled throughout this region and including Kaziranga, I could see that there was a distance between the reality of people, how they were living, versus, and even the social reality of why poaching kind of takes place, versus how it is framed in these upper echelons of power in conservation. So that sort of created a very delusioned conservationist who was looking for answers for more equitable conservation. And definitely there are multiple people sort of working on it. And I chose to do it in Kaziranga because Kaziranga has this legacy that it's seen as like this model conservation space for other spaces in India as well, to the point where, like, some historians even argue that even though there was not a lot working for Assam as a region because it was troubled with insurgency, but the fact that they were still able to save these rhinos in Kaziranga actually became, through like this heavy hand, became one of the templates that kind of designed India's really big flagship program called the Project Tiger. So looking at Kaziranga sort of is sort of a case study, but this case study sort of tries to, using Kaziranga as an example, I sort of try to um, question some of these power dynamics that are going there, taking place, and also increasingly, like, understanding how, capital based or neoliberal conservation initiatives sort of are laid out, because it's almost seems like a conservation experimental lab in India in many ways. So it becomes all the more pertinent to kind of look at this landscape and ask some of these difficult questions. So that is how I got into Kaziranga and what Kaziranga really means for the scholarship that I'm seeing. So yeah, and then what was my how did I kind of did my research? Um, so like I said, it was qualitative research. I really did not have enough space to talk about how I went about it. But I was situated in the landscape for at least over 10 months at this point. And previous to that, I mean, like, I've had some professional experience. Obviously, that experience was completely different in a very different context. But now, the best way to understand what happens happening in a landscape is to go and plant yourself there. That was my understanding, and that was also coming from this gap that I saw in conservation practice versus, designing conservation. So that gap was something. It was a political. You can say it was a political choice, I guess, to do a very place-based field work. So, I mean, I was living with one of the families over there. And through that, like, very organically, I have sort of, interacted with people. And the only challenge, and that has like really led to some really interesting conversations, even with like random strangers in the landscape, or some very targeted interviews with people. So that's why it took a long time to do these interviews. But I've using that time. I've done participant observations. I've spoken to people, like, some of my interviews, I've met them like multiple times and have had longer conversations. So that is how I sort of did my field work. Obviously, there are because I'm also trying to capture what the state thinks, and it's a heavily surveilled, landscape. So reaching the forest department was a tough thing. So kind of to understand the state perspective, I've got access to some of the policy documents and stuff as well. So that is how my engagement with the community has been. It's been very organic, and which is why, I mean, also there is a caveat in my research, and the caveat is that, like I said, Kaziranga is a very cosmopolitan landscape. It has always been that. There are multiple communities who live there. But because, it was so organically, like, I was placed there, and through that, I was able to build this network. A lot of my work is sort of about the Ahom community, who are also a part of this landscape and an important part of this landscape. So there are other communities as well, like I said, the Mission community or the Adivasi community, who were the tea workers. So I've not really been able to kind of get their opinion, although some of the events that have taken place in some of their territories as well. That I don't want to use the word territory, but some of the spaces that they occupy. So those voices have also sort of built into why studying Kaziranga is important. But my work has mostly been focused on homes. And I think this was also a choice. I mean, it happened organically, but I think that in some ways it has actually been a good thing as well. And I say that because research from Kaziranga kind of focuses more on mission communities or the Adivasis. And very rightly so, because they have sort of been marginalized or, been on the periphery of this whole story of Kaziranga. And the Ahom community used to live inside these forests as well, but they're a slightly more powerful community, and the perception has always been that they have won in this whole narrative. But my interactions with people and my interviews with people, my conversations with people shows that actually is not the case. So I've been able to sort of bring that sort of voice as well. So there are a lot of caveats with my feedback, but for the sake of presentation, I was kind of simplifying and talking about this entire community under this one banner of being Indigenous people. Obviously, there are marginalities in that, politics in that as well. Um, so yeah, there were some questions about how negative impacts. Okay, so explore some tourist expectations, right? I think Elif sort of asked this question. And so tourism expectations and what happens on the ground really pretty much depends on the way Kaziranga is marketed. And this is, I think, a criticism of conservation in general, that at least neoliberal conservation products, they sort of hide the social reality of how this conservation product is made. And I think which is what is happening here as well. Like, if you, I've interacted with a few tourists, but I've mostly interacted with tour operators to understand what expectations tourists have when they come into the landscape. And the expectation is actually just to see a tiger or a rhino in a pristine landscape. There is no interaction with the history of this landscape at all. And because I don't think, and also the government really doesn't want that history to come out. I mean, it's there in the domain, but it's not something that, they will talk about, that these are also the hardships that sort of people face. But this is a disconnect, right? Like, this is the whole fantasy or the spectacle of conservation, that it is kind of able to package this very nice, happy product of doing a safari, being able to see a tiger, being able to see a rhino, being able to see an elephant, without actually having to talk about the fact that how this land was acquired, how, this man elephant, this wildlife conflict kind of takes place, or how even to protect one particular species that you have come to see, what is going on in the background. So that disconnect is there, and that disconnect is needed to kind of sell this landscape. So that's there. In terms of like how to make it equitable, these are questions, like, I have to really say, give hands on to some of the people in the landscape. They're really starting to think about this themselves. And the tragedy of living in this landscape is the fact that there cannot be any other industry except agriculture or tourism, because it's a no development zone. So they can't even have a factory or anything. So this is all they have. This is all they have to rely on. The challenge people have spoken about is that it's limited. It's only 6 months. And like I said, that agricultural economy has also changed, because now everybody's sort of getting hooked onto tourism economy. So that's there. So what people are now trying to do, and now the state is also starting to recognize it. There has to be an itinerary which goes beyond the national park. So right now you come to Kaziranga, the only thing that you can do is go to the national park, and that's it. You can just do safaris. But because of that, what is happening, I think the profit is not getting equally distributed, or not everybody is able to sort of get a hand in the profit. That's because only very few people can afford to buy these jeeps, because they are expensive, their maintenance is expensive. And also not everybody is able to make these homestays. Like I said, like most of the capital investment has come from outsiders. So there's really not, they don't really own any of these big establishments. So now some of the tour operators, or who are actually from within the community, have sort of started to gather these itineraries which are beyond the national park, where they are taking people out for trekking, or they are creating these smaller experiences where it's circular, the input is given by the people, like in terms of, it could be agricultural, giving vegetables and stuff like that, so that they are trying to create more and more opportunities where more and more people are also able to participate in the economy, as opposed to how it is right now. And so indigenous people and their relationship with tourism, and who engages with tourism, again, is very skewed. In some ways the government sort of, so there is this whole legacy of people who had money were able to get into tourism, because people who had, whose family had government jobs, they were able to get loans and stuff, so they became the first movers in this landscape. And so they have sort of, not all of them, but most of them have kind of captured the profit. So, and not all communities are able to access tourism opportunities, like the mission communities, they have not been able to capitalize. But that is also because of the fact that their land rights are not sorted in that landscape. There's a whole legacy of land displacement in Assam, because of the river Brahmaputra. So the government would informally make them squat in a place, and then tell them, we'll give you these land titles, but those land rights have not been settled. So because of that, their position is very precarious. Their access to capital has been very limited. So therefore access into into the economy has been sort of limited. And then comes the Adivasi community, who were the tea workers who were got to these, because tea plantation is also really big in this landscape, although not as profitable anymore. But these are people who are only seen as production lines for tea cultivation and tea picking. So they have been put in this very very poor spaces, or they've been trapped in these poverty traps, because these tea plant companies need that labor to be cheap. And they again, because they're people who were bought into Assam, their land rights are also not settled. So people who don't have land rights settled are in an inherently terrible position in Kaziranga, and that kind of determines how much they can access the tourism economy. I know there are many other questions, and they're very interesting. I want to answer them all, but I think this is what I'll do. So thank you everybody for your comments and these questions. So yeah.
Thank you, Gargi, for responding to all questions and comments. Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for attending the session. Thank you, Gargi, for your presentation and responding to all questions and comments. Thank you to, I'm very grateful to our discussants, Dr. Tiffanie Hardbarger, Dr. Elif Vozar, Dr. Juan Martin, Dr. Chris Hurst for the insightful and constructive contributions, and to Dwani Sunil Lalai for an excellent peer commentary. Thank you as well to everyone who joined us and contributed to their discussion. On behalf of the Global South Network, I wish Gargi every success as the project develops. The discussion has highlighted the complexity of ecotourism in Kaziranga, particularly the tensions between conservation, development, local livelihoods, community participation, and the unequal distribution of costs and benefits. And I can clearly see how it resonates with some other communities outside India with which I'm familiar. Same time next week, let's meet our next guest speaker. Until then, look after yourself. Have a great day. Bye-bye.